All righty, boys and girls, it's been a long wait, but welcome back to another episode of the Red, White, Claret, and Blue Show, an emergency pod, if you will, with your hosts, Alex, myself, and Chris Casper, the friendly ghost Condit, your American villain voices, and as always, serving up the lukewarmiest of lukewarm opinions. Chris, you think that's unfair, or are you uncertain as to where the name is coming from?
No, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
I don't think it's totally fair, but I understand why you said it.
I'll post the receipts. You absolutely ducked the "when do you want to record" question every single time I asked you for it.
I'll take the blame for that, man. I don't know. I was too busy doing my actual job, That's the
Chris,
hard thing.
We have one job and one job only, and that is to bring Villa news to the masses. Really, Villa opinions to the masses, because we don't normally break news.
Yes.
But today, we are breaking news. And so I guess we should jump right into it and dispatch with the pleasantries, because we know that you've been terrible, you've been working, I've been terrible, I've been working. And so there's not much for us to catch up on that's all fun and happy and go lucky. So we'll jump right into it. We have an exclusive drop that I do not believe has been reported anywhere before. Correct me if I'm wrong. This has certainly been. What?
I said I looked for it online. I looked to see if anybody else had this exact report. Or this
it has certainly been speculated on, but it has not actually been confirmed. And so before I announce this, I think I need to make abundantly clear for the safety and security of my future job prospects. This is not something that I gained through my position at work. I swear on both my dogs' lives that this is not something that I learned through the walls of my company. This is something that I happened upon at TST just by meeting and speaking to the right people who happen to be involved in the world of soccer, specifically in England. And what I was told was that Aston Villa, senior executives, ownership, chief revenue officer, etc., have made the decision to sell the naming rights to Villa Park. This has been rumored before. We do not know who it will be sold to yet, but the rapidity with which these discussions have been agreed upon and seem to be accelerating, I am going to go out on a limb and say that it will no longer be Villa Park by the end of next season, if not sooner.
Yeah.
Maybe by the end of this summer.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising given the financial position the club are in, and it's also not unprecedented. It's maybe a little bit of a change from the storied grounds around England. You don't see those change names very often, but the new stadiums that are built, most of them have sponsorships attached to them. And here in America, everything has a sponsorship attached to it. Even Yankee Stadium or whatever. I don't know if they actually do, but every single arena, stadium, everything has some sort of sponsor attached to it. This doesn't bother me in the least, because when you and I talk about it, either on this podcast or in person or via text, we're just going to call it Villa Park. We're not going to call it anything else. So I don't know if this is like a great message for the potential sponsor, but I'm never going to call it anything else, and I don't think most people will either. No one's going to sit there and say, "Oh, it's ABC Supply Company Villa Park." Nobody says that.
Well, it's funny because when this unnamed source actually told me that the rights were being sold, he asked right away, because I had mentioned that we do this pod and the whole thing, and he was like, "Yeah, so I got a question for you. Like, they are, and I'm telling you unequivocally, they are selling the naming rights to Villa Park. How do you feel about that?" And I was like, "Listen, if they named it John Hancock Fenway Park, if they named it MetLife Yankee Stadium, it is still going to be Yankee Stadium, Fenway Park. It's not Chase Madison Square Garden. It is just
Right.
Madison Square Garden.
Right.
And, you look at the storied stadiums in the English Premier League. If they called it Warrior Anfield, would it not just be Anfield to
Right.
everybody?
Yeah.
Didn't Mike Ashley's company technically buy the naming rights to St. James Park? I mean, this shows you how sticky it was. Like, I can't even remember what the name of the company was. It's still St. James Park. So, and this is where I will bring in my career and everything that I do. We value this stuff all the time for different sports properties. What is the naming rights to your stadium, this lounge, whatever worth? And it is a very, very complex system that is not straight science. There's a lot of art as you estimate how many people see it. What's the value that you get from it being in what is FIFA called now, FC 26 or it being called Adidas Villa Park or whatever it is. You value that. You value the people who walk by. You value them saying it on NBC broadcasts and all that kind of stuff. And then where you care about those different people, and you come up with a valuation. So I'm not even going to begin to speculate what they're going to value the naming rights to Villa Park at. And anyone who just says, oh, well, they sold Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for, X tens of millions of dollars, so like Villa Park must be worth X, you're not thinking about it right. You're just not doing the math and the rigor. But all that is to say, to us, to fans, it's always going to be Villa Park. The funny part is, if there is a company that wants to profit off of the association with the stadium, you almost need to look at it from a perspective of you're going to win the hearts and minds and just, I guess not even hearts and minds, you're going to win the mind share of non-Villa fans. Chelsea fans might call it Adidas Field or whatever it is.
Right.
The random American in Idaho that winds up picking up FC 26 and, supports his local USL team might call it Adidas Field. It's always going to be Villa Park to us. Now, and so I agree with you that this is not a big deal. I expect there to be a very big reaction to it among a specific segment of the fan base.
Yes.
But they're going to get all up in arms about something that is ultimately going to benefit the club long-term from a financial perspective. And
short-term.
And short-term. And it's something that none of us are going to care about anyway. They're going to think that they're being all rebellious by calling it Villa Park still and like, we're sticking it to whoever the sponsor. Who cares?
Yep.
Who cares?
I agree. And I think the most interesting thing that's going to come out of this is how quickly does Chris Heck get blamed? Like, how fast? Because he's not here anymore. He's at Live. And I can think of a handful of very loud Twitter accounts that are going to blame him and journalists. Allegedly. That's one. But so I don't think this is a big deal. And a lot of this comes from our background, your background specifically in sports. For a short time, I was in sports marketing in the radio side, which was similar, but not quite the same. But we did the same sort of thing with sponsorships and all that, where we attached a certain value to certain things. And just being in American sports where everything is sponsored, Jacobs Field has been Progressive Field for longer than it was Jacobs Field in Cleveland, but I still call it Jacobs Field, right? So that's what I call it. And that's what it's the Jake, nobody calls it the Pro or the Prog or whatever. It's the Jake. So in the long term for Villa and short term for Villa, this does not and will not affect the day-to-day fan interaction with the club. It's still going to be the same place. They're just going to have a sponsor's name in front of it. And from a financial standpoint, because FFP is now a very real discussion, obviously, as we're seeing with all the discussion online and around the club. This is a benefit that Villa can have to ease the FFP burden, because right now or PSR or whatever, whichever one we're using today, it's a problem that Villa need to address, and this is a way to address it, and a way to address it above board, by the way. So you can show real value to a sponsor by saying your name is going to get said every week on NBC, during games, during recaps, on podcasts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because, as much as fans don't care about calling it sponsorship name Villa Park, who does care about doing that? Broadcasters, because they know that they have to get those naming rights correct, or they're going to get a nasty letter from the sponsor saying you've got to say our name.
Not just a letter. I mean, I'll tell you about. I used to be on the Microsoft account. The Surface on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. First 2 years, every broadcaster was calling them iPads, and the angry emails that would come in from the client to NBC to ESPN, whoever, just ripping them, ripping the league ripping the broadcasters to make sure this went right. Like, they take this stuff serious. Yeah, very serious.
Right.
So they will get it right. And that's why I say before, the people who might not call it Villa Park are people that we should not care whether they call it Villa Park or not.
Correct. You're right.
I don't care if a random Crystal Palace fan calls it Villa Park. I just don't.
I mean, I don't care what anybody calls it, to be honest with you. Like, that maybe that's very detached, but if you think that I'm losing sleep over the idea that anybody is calling anything a different name, I am not. I'm not that upset about anything like that.
So now let me give you a hypothetical, because this is something that we don't know whether it's going to happen or not. There have been a number of different proposals and discussions around either redeveloping the North Stand, moving Villa Park entirely, tearing it down and rebuilding it somewhere else. That is where I think the name could potentially come in. To use Philadelphia as an example, it was Veterans Stadium, the Vet. They tore it down and built Lincoln Financial Field. Right. So no one was calling it the Vet when they tore it down and rebuilt it under a completely different name. And I think that's where you run into a disassociation between the park and the name. So if they tear down Villa Park and they build it up somewhere else, and it's called, again, just to keep using it, like Adidas Field, then does the Villa Park name go away? But probably. Also, at that point, does it matter because it's not Villa Park anymore?
Right. Probably. I think if that happens, yes. Whether or not that will happen, I think, is a very long and complicated discussion based on the very little bit of research that I've done in terms of how difficult this has been, both the redevelopment of the North Stand and the potential of moving the club to another area. There are all kinds of governmental issues that need to be dealt with for that. And that's a whole different ball of wax. But if that happens, if they tear down the old stadium and move to another location, then I think, yes, then I think you just call it whatever it is. I mean, nobody calls Tottenham Hotspur Stadium White Hart Lane, right? Because it's not. So I think that the reasonable take here, which we will not see online when this news is confirmed, the reasonable take is that in the long run, for real fans, for actual fans that go to the ground on a regular basis, this doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter at all. And actually it benefits the club. And I think that if we want to look at what is best for the health of the club long-term to compete at the level at which we are currently competing, and I say we being Villa, even though you and I have no association with them, but still, we cannot stay in Europe every year like this, spending a net spend of 86 million pound. Like we can't, over 3 years, by the way, but we can't do it. That if you want to talk about sustainability, and that is not sustainable, not when your opponents are spending hundreds of millions of pounds. It just can't happen. I mean, Man City has spent like 300 million pounds since like January at this point. We can't keep up with that without adding revenue and continuing to win, because that's the fastest way to add revenue. So the club has a real financial fair play, or PSR, problem. And this, I think, is a great step to address it without fundamentally harming the ideals of the club or the ground, in my opinion.
Yeah, so let's talk about PSR a little bit, because there have been a number of different, somewhat contrarian reports that have come out over the past couple of weeks as people have tried to parse through this. And what we need to remember at the end of the day is no one, not even really the club at this point, knows what kind of hole they're in, if any, because the books have not been released yet. And, all the incomes haven't been brought in and totaled and all that kind of stuff. But to summarize a few, and I know you have another one from Kieran Maguire as well. There was the Athletic article that came out a couple weeks ago that ranked all the Premier League clubs by how much they could conceivably lose on these books and how at risk they felt like they were at breaking that. To the point that you made, somehow Chelsea has been able to buy 2 complete rosters. They've gotten rid of their like 9-year amortization loophole. You can only amortize a contract over 5 years, even if you sign someone for a decade. And yet they were still at the top, I believe the very top, if not, close to it, being able to lose over 200 million pounds. Whereas Villa somehow, who have effectively run a net profit for a couple years, were at only 15 million. That is where these rules feel unfair, unclear.
Net spend profit. I want to point out, yes, a net spend profit, that because everything else is not. I just want to make that clear, because they are not profitable on the other side, right? That's where the issue runs into. I just want to make sure that's all.
No, that's a really important clarification. Yeah. Now, then you have the financial reporter for Birmingham Mail, who came on the Claret and Blue podcast. His perspective was the club will probably be fine by the June 30th because of the big sales that they made between Moussa Diaby and John Duran, which is instantly bankable. Yes, we turned around and spent 50 million on Amadou Onana. We spent the 30 some odd million on Ian Maatson, but that gets amortized over the length of the contract. So it's not 50 million that comes right out of that 100 plus that we got from Duran and Moussa Diaby. It's, let's say he's on a 4-year deal. It's roughly 12.5 million that goes against those books. What he thought our bigger issue was going to be was in Europe. And this is something that we explained previously, but I'll just give a quick reprimer on it. In England, it is based on your spend out and what you then bring in player sales, revenue, all that kind of stuff. And so you cannot lose more than 70%, right, is the number that they use. Europe and UEFA is entirely what you spend on wages, and it is a different ratio. So Villa's wages are in gross violation of UEFA's PSR rules. Now, there is some indication that moving forward, the EPL is going to move towards adopting UEFA's rules. So that kind of facilitates things. There's only one measure that you need to go against. At least right now, Villa has already been in negotiations with UEFA, probably going to pay a fine. That being said, the more often you break the rule, the bigger your punishment is going to be. So this isn't something that we can do every single year, spend, 99% of our revenue on wages and just continue to pay $100,000-$200,000 fine. It's going to ultimately wind up in point deductions, being kicked out of competitions, like all that kind of stuff. So ultimately, he felt like more importantly than meeting the EPL's rules by June 30th, Villa are going to need to shed salary.
Yeah.
And that is Rashford. That is Marco Asensio. That is who are some of our higher earners now.
Luka Dean,
for example, Dean, Emi Martinez,
Coutinho.
that Coutinho still. Yep.
Yeah. One more year.
Now supposedly we're buying him out of the remainder of his deal.
Yeah.
And that is why you see a lot of those guys' names in most of these rumors.
Yep.
But Chris, you have heard something even different still from Kieran Maguire.
Kieran Maguire, who is a source, he's the best in the business, if you ask me. The Price of Football pod, I've mentioned it several times here. Obviously, anyone who's listening to this podcast, the dozens of you that do, have listened to that one, or probably have at least heard of it. He mentions in one of their most recent podcasts that Aston Villa are the only club of the 20 in the Premier League this season in danger of a PSR breach. And the reason being that it's not just your net spend, and turnover and player sales. It's the turnover and wage bill that's going to get Aston Villa. So it's not different from what the folks on the Claret and Blue podcast with the Birmingham Mail were saying. The issue is that Villa spent something near 93% of their revenue on wages. So that is unsustainable. I agree. If you're considering it the way that the rules do, I don't, and we'll have another podcast about this because I think people should be free to lose their money if they want to. Like if Nasser Swarif and Wes Edens want to lose their money, who should stop them from doing that? But anyway,
I'm going to contradict you on that point.
I understand. No, I'm not saying have no breaks. I'm not saying have no place to stop. But so that the issue that Villa face is that their wages are too high, and they need to shed salary, and they're going to be like razor thin in terms of how close they're going to be to an FFP breach or PSR breach come the end of this month. So when the books hit, Villa always extend a month, or at least they have for the last few seasons. They do a 13-month calendar, right? So they'll have an additional month where they can try and jam a sale or two in here to get right for PSR, and then we'll see where they shake out. But that was Kieran Maguire's take from the Price Football Pod, and he's been on a handful of shows and podcasts since then. So this is not news that I'm breaking out there. But I think I have a guest. Good night, Walter. Good night, bud. See you later. All right.
Awesome.
All right. So
content right there.
That punctuates my point perfectly. I think ultimately Villa are going to be fine. I look forward to the accounts hitting the books so that we can get a look at them. And I do think that I don't think that the club did this recklessly. I think they did it very carefully, knowing they were going to be right on the edge. And I think that's going to be reflected. And I think that the only thing we can do as in terms of a club is to continue to stay as high as we can in the table and continue to make European competitions for the additional revenue. Champions League really would have been great because there's a significant drop in revenue between Champions League and Europa League. But just to stay in Europe and continue to build your coefficient in European competitions because you get paid more the longer you're in European competitions. You make more revenue each round you advance. So it's important to stay in European competitions and consistently be there to make more revenue in the long term as well. So they're doing it the best they can given the set of rules that they're in.
Yeah, and ultimately it's to kind of bring it back to where we started, because I don't think that we have much more to say on this.
No.
You have to ultimately increase your commercial revenues if you want that to happen. You cannot continue to expect to make it up via player sales. Chelsea do not have 200 million pound that they can lose because they've been super efficient with their player sales. They're losing most money on those guys because they either become good enough to be in the first team or they don't make the first team and their value plummets. So to anyone who thinks that selling the naming rights to the stadium, getting more sponsorships, building out some of these Adidas stores in London and Manchester in the United States, whatever it is, isn't the way to sustainable long-term European success. I don't know what to tell you, because, and you and I had this conversation via text. You can respond to this again if you want, or we can just sort of let it. If your strategy is to continue to sell players for big money and replace them with cheaper players, eventually that will catch up to you. Every team that has done that as a model eventually gets caught up with, because all you need is one bad window. You replace those guys with a couple busts and you are plummeting down the table. Happened to Southampton when they had, Callum Chambers and Nathaniel Klein and all those guys. Where are they now? The championship. So Villa have a great scouting department. Monchi is great at negotiating deals. You just can't keep this hit rate forever. And that's why eventually you need to supplement your revenues in a different way.
All you have to do is find Morgan Rogers every time. That's all.
Yeah.
Just exactly. A guy for £8 million that now starts for England. That's all.
Yeah.
How hard is that?
And if you listen to some fans, you flip him and bring back Jack Grealish for 40.
That's another podcast too. But it's good to get back in the lab. It's been a long time. It's been too long.
Yeah, it's been fun. In the coming weeks, everybody keep your eyes peeled. We're going to do probably something like a transfer power ranking. So most pods go through like keep, loan, sell, or something like that. We don't need to do that because everybody is pretty much for sale at this point, other than Morgan Rogers. Yep. But what we will probably do is power rank who we feel like is most likely to go and when. As Chris said, we'll also do another episode on PSR, and then we'll continue throughout the summer with transfer news, Villa's US tour, and anything else that's coming out of the club as we get ready for another season in European competition and hopefully another chance for Unai Emery to shoot us back into the Champions League.
And we'll wait for Alex to break some more news.
Don't set the bar too high. This might be the peak of my journalistic career.
I like it. I'm glad I was here for it.
All right, man. Well, we'll talk soon. Safe travels in the meantime. Happy birthday to Lil Walt. And until we speak again, up the Villa.
Up the Villa.
Hi, Mom and Dad.